and let's get started. So, Jonathan and Terri.
Thank you, Diane, very much. I made the self-declaration a little bit earlier this morning to Diane and the crew before we assembled for this program that I don't prepare my material until the night before. And the reason I do that is because everything changes. Who would have thought a week and a half ago we would be facing the kind of thing we are facing now, with the riots in the street, with the breakdown of civility in a lot of areas of our country. And in fact, now it's advanced itself throughout the world. We're seeing demonstrations in Europe, we're seeing demonstrations all over the planet relative to this terrible thing that occurred in Minneapolis a little bit of a week ago. My concern then becomes, what do I do? Well, I look over my left shoulder and I see my TV screen, and I just see an item about restoring law and order. I see a TV screen that the governor of New York blames the mayor of New York City for not keeping control. We see all kinds of uprising and concern overall. At least twice a week, I conduct a program with all the members of my firm to discuss what's going on, what their feelings are. And the question I asked them this morning is, how many of you are prepared to travel to go to a client event, a client board meeting, whatever it might be? And there was a lot of reluctance. There was a lot of concern. And basically, the consensus was it will really depend on the circumstances that exist at the time I may have to make that decision. I may pack my bag on a Monday night, wake up on a Tuesday morning to go to the airport, but I look at the news and suddenly my whole perspective has changed. That's what we're up against right now in this whole area of risk management. So much of what is going to be dependent here is personal choice. And so I believe that one of the key elements that's so important right now is you feel for what you are going to do, your own self-evaluation as to what's important. Then equate that and ask yourself, what are the people who I'm hoping are going to come to my program going to do? They have the same feeling that I do. If I'm an association member, I know that going to that association membership meeting or whatever is not mandatory, it's discretionary. If I'm a corporate staff employee, I know pretty much so that I'm going to have to go to that corporate meeting unless the boss has a feeling that really we shouldn't hold that meeting. So a lot of this is going to be last minute determination, but more importantly, it's going to be risk management at a personal point of view. And I would welcome what Terri has to say, especially from her standpoint of being somebody who's trying to put together programs, meetings, events, and make them fit.
Thank you, Jonathan. So over the past few weeks, I've been working with my clients to take a look back at what worked and what didn't. Were they really prepared for a pandemic? We've spent a number of years focusing on safety security for all the reasons that we're aware of, but not an illness or a pandemic. And as a meeting planner, we're the trusted advisor to our stakeholders. They expect us to lead, research, and provide information, recommend next steps, and inform everybody for constant communication. So yesterday I was on a call with a couple of my clients, and they said, what are you using to decide if meetings should happen and should we attend? And really, you have to do the duty of research of the venue, the city, destination, what is happening, what are their guidelines, mandates, what are the ages of your attendees for different meetings? Do they fall into a category that is more at risk? And then what is the business purpose? What is your frustration of purpose of being able to attend, to define what that looks like? And duty of care on your part as the planner bringing your attendees there, but as well as the duty of the care of the hotels. One hotel yesterday asked me, is our client ready to come in the fall? And like Jonathan said, it's too early to answer that question because right now the hotel is closed, and are they going to be functioning? And what is the city guidelines going to be? So really doing that duty of care standards of researching, informing, planning, and recommending, having a risk management strategy that runs through a number of different key topics. And most importantly, as a planner, how do these safety things affect our budgets? And typically you hear that safety costs 5 to 10% of your budget. And then how does it affect budget in other areas of how we deliver food now, how we provide a hybrid meeting because a ballroom can't seat everybody. So we have to then go virtual with half the meetings. So there's a lot of things to consider. I welcome everybody's questions on what I'm working on a daily basis, but that would be my introduction from a risk and duty of care standpoint of what I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah, well, thank you, Terri. John, I'm sure you've been seeing or hearing about a lot of the same topics, and how are you giving people advice with that?
Well, legal advice right now is in a state of flux as well, because one of the things that we're concerned about is we want to look at this, and I've said this on previous programs as well, is not a win-win type of situation with those with whom we're working, our attendees, the publics we serve, and we are now concerned with the safety, the health, and the emotional well-being of people who are going to be depending upon us to make a certain call. One of the things that we are doing with clients is saying, look, let's postpone any kind of decision that has to be made until the point of where a decision has to be made. What do I mean by that? I mean, you look at your contracts, you look at what you're anticipating, you look at what Terri just indicated. We're going to reduce the number of sleeping rooms, and we're going to increase the amount of space that we're going to need to conduct meetings and programs. We're going to have social distancing. I think this is one thing I can safely predict for quite a while. There are going to be people who are going to insist upon it. We're going to have, with all of the various safety and health codes that are being promoted by groups like the WTTC, American Hotel and Lodging Association, and the like. We're looking for what are the venues that we're going to be relying on, what are their assurances as to what they're doing. Then we have to ask ourselves, from the standpoint, from your own personal viewpoint, are those assurances sufficient for you to make a decision that you're prepared to go? So a lot of what we're going to be looking at, Dianne, is what is the other side saying they're going to provide. By the other side, I mean the people we rely on to help us pull off the successful event. That's all we want to do, pull off the successful event. But there are a couple of subcategories on that successful event. I'm safe. I am not going to get sick. I'm not going to encounter some kind of other problem that's known or unknown at the time. Back to that duty of care. But we all also have that self-imposed duty of care. If I decide to go to the meeting, have I assumed the liabilities, knowing what we know today relative to our participation? So we want to be very careful. We want to be very circumspect. But we also always want to look at it from the standpoint of what would I do in those circumstances, and will I expect reasonably that my attendees would do the same?
Right. Well, John, I mean, too, and then just what is so important in a contract? I mean, the last time you were on one of these events with me, and you've been one of the supporters, is we spoke about, okay, we're dealing with the pandemic, which we still are, right? In terms of clauses and what gets covered in there. Now, in the past, from the terrorism threats, we put in impossibility or improbability clauses, or going by the red, orange, yellow code. I mean, what's going to change? And from Terry's point of view, what does she tell a customer? How does that work? John, can you give us some insight on that?
Sure. Let me make this observation. Before, we were relying upon whether we had a communicable disease clause in our contract for force majeure. Well, for better or worse, we now have a second clause that we need to be concerned about, and that is we're looking. Oh, shoot. I guess we got, sorry about that. But what we're looking at now is a second aspect. Before, we were trying to rely on force majeure for COVID. Now we have a whole different aspect that we've added to the program. That's now public disobedience, rioting, civil disobedience, and the like. So the game has changed a little bit because of what's been happening with the riots. And it is peaceful, peaceful protest, but unfortunately, when the COVID aspect is now a little bit overwhelmed by this, we have that other consideration to come into play. So what we're looking at in our clauses today is we're trying to expand as to the availability of reasons for us to be able to cancel without liability or to negotiate alternatives relative to the potential liability. But more importantly, on both sides, all sides of the question, what is going to be in the best interest of the safety and health of those people who are going to be dependent upon us as to what we're planning. But again,
John, yeah, I see that we have lots of questions coming in. So just let me just shoot some of these. I would like to hear about the hotel venue's liability if attendees get sick. Well, this is a COVID question. Would like to hear about the hotel venue's liability if attendees get sick and there is a COVID-19 outbreak. Has that been legally determined where liability lies or doesn't?
Well, it's not been determined. It's going to be, from a plaintiff's point of view, if you're a lawyer, you're now going to have to show that by virtue of that person going to the meeting, they came down with whatever it might be. The other part of the thing is if the hotel has subscribed to all of the various safety and health standards that are being promulgated, has met what the CDC has required, has done everything else, well, more than likely, that person could have picked up the disease on their way to the meeting. They could have gotten it at the airport. They could have gotten it from the valet parking assistant. So the burden of proof is going to be relatively substantial. Some properties have come out with a requirement that if you show up and you go and utilize my services, you're waiving your rights to any kind of liability claim because you have assumed that by participating. That's going to be a major throw also for people to overcome. I think the premises liability, etc. Now, if I'm corporate and I'm told by my boss I absolutely positively have to go to that meeting, damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead, I'll probably have a claim, but that claim is not going to be for liability there. It's going to be a workers' compensation claim. And so you have a whole different area of liability that may come into play depending upon the circumstances. So all of these
right. John, I don't know if we're having a little issue with your sound, but Terri, can you hear me?
Yep. Be driven by what you can prove, which is the most important factor.
Yeah, Terri, I'm going to shift to you because I know you brought an article to my attention last night because John is thinking about, okay, you're at the meeting and I do have another couple of questions coming in, but how about the article where it starts at the airport, doesn't it? So people will be screened at an airport. How much proof will we need to show that we've been tested and gone through a smart machine? And Terri, do you want to speak a little bit about that or comment what John just said? Terri, we can't, no sound, Terri. John, did you see the article about, oh, there you go. All right, there we go.
I switched to my headset, but it didn't work, so hopefully you can hear me.
Thank you.
That's our duty to research as planners, and currently I'm working with some of my clients on getting information from the city CVBs, who are an incredible resource to us on what is happening in their cities and with their airports. What have they modified? What have they changed? So from the point that that meeting attendee's plane lands and they have to exit that plane, what happens with their luggage? Has anybody touched anything? Have passengers touched each other? What do they touch all the way out of the airport? And I think John alluded to this, that they can set up all the things, but what is the individual person's responsibility to be good fellow citizen and meeting attendee? And that's bring your wipes. You can now bring up to 12 ounces of Purell on through security. So are you taking the precautions as a good attendee? And then the biggest part is our duty to inform. So as we communicate often, have it on our websites, have it sent out to meeting attendees and to everybody involved in the program. so that they know what's happening in the city that they're going to. Maybe Lyft and Uber hasn't come back yet. What are their transportation options? What has the planner done to help get transportation from the airport to the hotel if they can't arrive individually? And all of that informing is a really big part of what we need to do. And most importantly, the more you communicate and the more you inform, it makes sure attendees feel comfortable to attend.
Yes. Now here's one, and John, think about this too, is from one of our attendees. My concern is how much responsibility should the trade association take on? What Terry was saying, does the attendee have a certain responsibility for themselves? And we can try to offer a clean and safe environment, but how much more are we expected to do? Do you think this will lead to sort of a checklist? And just to what Terry was saying, like a disclaimer to sign? I don't know.
Well, let me put it this way. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink the water. And so no matter how many warnings, how many things you put out there in front of them, they may or may not abide by. Let's assume your association, your corporation says, thou shalt always maintain 6 feet away from anybody else. When was the last time you were at a cocktail party when the bar opened and you were the first ones in the room, that there was not a mob at the bar? Are you going to be paced 6 feet away on both sides, all sides? Draw that circle around you as to that 6-foot halo that people have to maintain. So am I going to be able to prove if I go to a court of law, well, I always maintained that 6 feet. I'm always a good citizen. I wore my mask. My mask was one of those masks which guaranteed that stuff would not. Yeah, there is a deal of being self-responsible. And I think we assume risk. If I go to the grocery store early on a Saturday morning, have my mask on, sanitize the grocery cart, walk through, pick up my packages, and leave the grocery store through a self-checkout, and I key in my number, do I know whether or not that keyboard has been sanitized? I don't. But I made the assumption of liability because I don't have gloves on, that when I touch that, and if I had gloves on, I probably couldn't put it in if it's a face value. I'm going to, come on, I think we've got to get over this idea of shifting liability upon something that you have assumed. I think we have to look at, have we done everything to make sure from that duty of care that we're using a hotel that has subscribed to, is certified to provide the adequate sanitation and other requirements that the organization has subscribed to through some of the agencies, the associations, the WTTC, the CDC, all of those things. I think that becomes a real issue. I would not look at this as that if I'm an association, I'm a guarantor of your health and safety. Anymore, prior to this, I was a guarantor of your health and safety.
Right, right. I mean, if the stove is hot and if the stove is hot and you touch it, I did what I could, and I,
well, you know the old adage, Diane. If a cat sits on a hot stove, that cat is not going to sit on a cold stove either. It gets out of the stove sitting business.
That's true. So here's a couple more. Liability is going to differ depending on whether it is a trade association sponsored event versus a corporate event. I think everyone should sign a waiver. It's so difficult to figure out how someone may have been in contact with the virus. Can we enforce that, John? Terry, what do you think?
Well, here's why. I mean, waivers, it's what we call an assumed consent and an assumed knowledge and assumed information, that we know what liability we are assuming and that we're willing to take that on. I'm a skier, and I would go, when I buy my lift ticket, there's a little sign over the ski tow booth that says, hey guy, skiing can be dangerous to your health. You may fall down, you may break a bone, you may run into a tree may run into you. You might even die. Have a nice day and enjoy the slopes. I mean, by virtue of issues that are provided by state law where ski resorts are, that will stand up. Will that stand up in this kind of situation? Let's stay tuned and see what the courts decide. But when I walk in and I am told that, and I mean, has anybody been able to turn on TV, a radio, or anything, pick up a newspaper, that there's not a warning about COVID? There's not a warning about walking in the streets after curfew? Come on, let's be real. there are things out there that I have assumed, and if I decide to do it, then that's on me. I'm not so concerned about that individual liability as I am about assuring or trying to give somewhat relative picture of telling people what they can assume is going to be the situation when they get to the hotel. Let me see, if I'm a meeting planner from the hotel or the convention center, how are you going to set up that bar to be able to have people? How are you going to be able to set that table so that I can keep 6 feet apart when we have a dinner? I know I'm not going to do a buffet. I know I'm going to do things which are limited touch. I'm going to do everything in my power to try to give people an assurance that if you come to my meeting and you use your own reasonable, good judgment, that you're going to be okay. But you still, that's an individual decision on your part.
Right. So basically, the host or the meeting planner, you do as much as you can within the knowledge that you have up to that moment to provide that safe and secure environment. And then, like everything else, it's an indemnification issue in a sense of what happens to that person.
Well,
Is that
I
what
will
you're
look at it this
thinking,
way
John?
too. If the hotel tells me that they're going to be sanitizing all of the public space at least every 3 hours, one of the things I'm going to insist on is that be put in the contract. I want to know what you're doing. And then if you breach that warranty, then I'm going to have that shifting of liability to you. And I'm also going to have a nice discussion with you when we go through the master account.
Yeah. A couple questions before we wrap up our time.
Diane, can I mention something really
Please.
quick?
Yes,
So
please, Terri.
I've been following the duty of care rules for a long time. I spent 30 years on the hotel side before I became a planner 8 years ago. And at the Meetings Industry Council, which is the MIC conference that's held in Colorado every spring, that was literally days before everything shut down. And I was in the stadium at the Nuggets basketball game, completely sold out. And we were at the MIC conference, and then all of a sudden everything closed. But I would love to give a shout out to one of the sessions that I attended there, which Brenda Rivers did. And I see a comment in the group chat that she's actually on today. But for people that need additional, because I'm at a very high level with it, and she does this every day, Brenda Rivers can be reached at brivers@safellc.com. And for any planners on the line that really need to dig deep on the duty of care part of it and your role as a planner, she is a fantastic resource.
Right. And Terri, you'll also be hearing from T&M Protection Resources and other people we have on. Everyone will hear today. So it's good. What I hear is that there are a lot of people involved in duty and care, and that makes me feel good. So let's see. We have a couple more questions here. Moving on. What are your thoughts on contact tracing? Should it come to our attention that someone had symptoms during the event or shows them soon after leaving the event? How do you communicate that to everyone that was there? John, you want to try that one?
Well, I wish I could come up with an answer to that, but we have all kinds of issues of privacy. We have issues overall. We have a lot of states right now which are employing people to do contact tracing. We know that Google and Apple were looking at ways by which, if your cell phone or whatever, if you were the person who comes down with it, you would then have a contact overall that would come up, that you would be told that you were near somebody at a time that they have tested positive or whatever. I think that the whole thing of contact tracing is a next step that's going to be important, because let's face it, if you go to an event and there's one person there and you come in contact with that one person, you go out and walk the street, go to the grocery store, get on an airplane, well, there are 10 people around you. Now you've hit 10 more people. So it has that mushroom effect of carrying out. So I think contact tracing is going to be important, and it's going to be one way by which we help to stem this by, again, getting those 10 people that you may have come in contact with so that they self-quarantine and don't infect anybody else, because it's just that multiple thing. It's that kind of thing. How successful will it be? We're about to find out, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And so I think, just for today, and we have a couple minutes just for a closing statement on the subject of what planners should be adding to their list of responsibilities from a legal point of view, from a contract point of view, how to communicate, given the due diligence that we're responsible for. John, what would you, leave with your 1 minute?
Well, as I started this is a question of you doing your own self-evaluation. What is it that you're going to require for yourself to feel safe, to feel that you want to participate in that program? And then how much liability, how much risk are you willing to assume? In making that determination, in no small part, you're going to look at the venue, you're going to look at the sponsor of the program as to what they're trying to do to make you feel comfortable. Then you have to ask yourself, have they assured me with a comfortability level that I'm prepared to go? So it might be that the venue has done that, but your transportation mode, you're not secure with.
Right. Very good point, John, because all of the companies, it's almost, and it's a good segue into insurance, is having the assurance from everyone on your team that you're all following the rule. Terri, do you have one last statement on contracts and responsibilities and how you would want to communicate with your clients?
I would really say it's watching the city, county, and state bans and mandates. And as we grow, hopefully in reverse, we're going to see meetings of 10, meetings of up to 50, meetings of up to 100. Keeping in touch with the CVBs and the cities that you're going to and communicating that to your stakeholders so that you can make that go, no-go decision on the meeting. And very often it doesn't happen until within 30 days. And a lot of stakeholders get eager and want to do something sooner. But if you're evaluating your attendees that want to have the meeting and the purpose of the meeting to be delivered, it's really communicating that and keeping in touch with everybody in the place that you're going.
All right. Yes. Thank you. So thank you. So we live in a tenuous time. Legal is always important. Communicating with customers and keeping up to date with the most current information that we can share with one another is and always will be our ultimate responsibility, doing the right thing as much as we can. So thank you, John.
Last comment. Yeah, one last
John.
comment I'd like to make
Sure.
is there is a legal issue and there's a practical issue. Right now, the legal issue should take second place as to what is the practical, pragmatic, and realistic result that you're trying to obtain. The legal, I can help you with. We can work that through. But more importantly, even if you have the law on your side, is it still the right thing to do?
Yeah, and just one more comment here that we just received in before we move on to Wayne is my company is requiring self-quarantine for 14 days after returning from any sort of travel. Business travel is banned.
By the way, I have that rule in effect for my office that if you do international travel and you come back, you're going to do 14 days of quarantine. Same with domestic travel as it stands right now. So I think that's a pragmatic approach. If you're in a challenge class of being over 60, depending on where you live, you may have an apartment building. If you're in a senior living type of environment, over 55, you're probably going to face the same kind of restrictions as to what's going on. And certainly for most offices, now a temperature check may be required before you can enter the building even, or before you can even get to your office. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that being self-imposed by the employer, association, corporate, whatever, or even in smaller situations, as just protection. Remember, this is a two-way street. You can be one of those people who carries the disease, or you can be one of those people who's going to be susceptible to the disease.
Thank you, John, as always. Thank you, Terri. I appreciate your both being here. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and questions. So.